Hi, welcome everyone to the fifth and final in this series film Introduction to the Psychologically Informed Environments, or PIE. Although we do have a bonus as well, I'm going to post and send around the link to a great interview between Claire Ritchie and Joe Prestige from Homeless Link, a webinar that they've had a discussion about what the differences and similarities are between trauma-informed care, also known as TIC, and PIE, Psychologically Informed Environments. And that's a really worthwhile film to watch as they kind of tease out some of the similarities and differences in the history of where those ideas have come from and how often these ideas are overlapping. So do watch that if you're interested in trauma-informed care and PIE. That'd be worth watching, a separate film. On this film, we're going to have an interview with Robin Johnson, and he's going to describe this great resource called PieLinknet, which anybody can Google and look up, and then register to become a member, which is free. And he's going to give us a tour of that, because often when people suggest things, we're all in busy jobs, I think sometimes it can think, well, that's maybe something I might do. But if you actually see a 15-minute film of Robin talking about what the resources are, it's much more easy to make your mind up to actually, oh, it's worth me going there, putting something in the diary, registering, and then kind of having a regular thing where you maybe spend half an hour looking at that a week, and it becomes more, you can see the value of the resource by his interview. So here's Robin describing PIE, link.net.
Right, I've been asked if I could produce a quick video just to introduce people to the PieLink, the website that we have, to see how it actually operates. So let's, we're also going to see here just what a low-tech outfit this is. Don't get the impression that you've got to be massively skilled to produce something like this. It takes a lot of work, but it doesn't take, it's not rocket science. This is just about using new technology to start to communicate more effectively with ourselves, with each other. So let's go down to the main page, the PieLink website, as you will find it. So up here we have our strapline, the logo, the PieLink.net. That's actually an old logo. We're going to update that slightly. But the tagline that comes with it, sharing conversations about homelessness, that is really what we're all about here. And if you look further over onto the right, register and log in. So what this tells you straight away is that this is an area where if you become a member, or you register and then you log in, you get access to some part of the sites that the rest of the people do not see. But for now, let's work our way through. You've got your usual menu bar with all the different areas that drop down, and we'll come back to that in a second. But first, let's look at the rest of the main front page. Welcome to the PieLink, it says. This is the area that just says, yes, you've come to a practice exchange site for a psychologically informed environment. And we have here a little intro video done in November.
Hello and welcome to the PieLink, the new PieLink,
which was done when the site was just had been open about 6 or 7 weeks by then. That's the November welcome video. Really need to update this with one for, say, now, for January, because there's been so much that's happened since then. This is quite a fast-moving world, and that's why the web, with this stuff that you can update continuously, is quite useful. So there are one or two things which are regular features, though. We have what we call the library. Now, the library is not just published papers. You also have audio, visual and podcasts and so on there. But if you're searching for something that you think might be here, or just a subject that you'd like to know what we've got, the library is where you will go. We also have a members directory for those people who have signed in and become members up there. And this is a way that people with a particular interest in a particular aspect can identify each other and so network. We've got members now in Australia and in North America and Canada and so on, but the membership side is building up at the moment. We've not yet reached that kind of critical mass that means we've suddenly got a mass membership, but it's still a relatively small group of people wanting to use and wanting to learn more about this. Now, we've talked about using video. Let's have a nice little example here.
So I've been doing stick buddies for...
In fact, let's expand this.
I was out last night. I think I go home at About 1:15.
That's Stuart of Westminster Street Buddies Street Outreach Scheme. We're using peer mentors. Fantastic, fabulous scheme, and you'll find more videos talking with the manager of the scheme there. And we're hoping to get some more written material on them. But it shows how the vivacity of that's a recording, obviously, of an interview, but it was just a completely off-the-cuff, in a spare moment in the office as Stuart had popped in, and we just asked his views and opinions about the work he was doing. It's a lovely little bit of video. And in the voices page we have many more of those. I'll come back to them in a second. Now here, from the look of that, this is the custard pie area of the site. Here we're asking questions, not just saying this is what a pie is and so on, but what are some of the trickier areas? What are the bits you might want to think about and go into a bit more? How does it relate to some of the other issues like housing first and trauma-informed care and and so on? So there's another area, in other words, for digging a little bit underneath the surface. Here, latest news and current events. This follows on from this fast-paced stuff. We're going to have news and items. So the first PieLinknet newsletter came out in December. We just produced a new one in January. So here we're talking about the first newsletter. We'll need to rewrite this now because we have the new one. And here we're talking about the use of webinars and the new technology, the social media stuff such as Blab and Periscope and AppearIn. And here, in fact, we then have an example of using this video technology, this, is it right to call it video? It's broadcasting, live streaming technology. So let's have just another little example of that.
Okay.
In other words, this is the example of us still being very, very new and learning how to make this stuff work. So let's go a little bit further in. That should, oh, it's good, we're on.
No, my guess is people in Boston and Seattle.
As you can see, we hadn't got the sound quality sorted out at all by then. So this is really us being pretty transparent about the fact that we are learning by doing. But there are some nicer examples of that, which we'll come to in a bit. So there we are. There's your basic site with what we're saying about what we're doing. Let's go along to that menus banner a bit more. What we call the idea. This is about the basic idea of what is a psychologically informed environment. What do we mean by it? And what are we trying to do with developing this PieLink community? Well, the community talks about wanting to get communication between policymakers and commissioners and researchers and so on. And here's an example. Here's a talk that I gave, in fact, at a conference with Homeless Link Southwest, which was asking, who needs them? Why do we bother with psychologically informed environments? Isn't it just about housing? And isn't homelessness just about providing basic shelter? And so here we're arguing that if you look at the kind of psychological and emotional problems that people using your service have, you have to be addressing those. And it goes into some of the detailed recent stats and some of the policy thinking of the old and the new, the current UK government about getting services working together to meet massive health inequalities of people who've missed out of services. So this is something about the ideas behind why we're developing these services. What do we actually mean by a pie? What exactly is a psychologically informed environment? So over here, we've got a little handy video of some of the basic elements.
Okay, I'm going to attempt in this brief video to give a little quick outline into what a psychologically informed environment.
A quick outline. It's about 10-15 minutes or so, but it uses the metaphor of hand to develop a handy guide. And there are a few other little videos we have here. This one, for example, might be worth a moment to look at. Here we are using cartooning.
One thing we need to address,
Does it take a psychologist to make a pie? Well, there's our pie, and here's our psychologist. And we can say some quite complicated things in cartoon form. and make them a lot more accessible and even make them sometimes fun. So we've got a couple of cartoon areas, and I'd certainly like to have a lot more. So here's your basic introduction. This is your starter for 10. What is a psychologically informed environment? So for people who are really new to it, this is the area to go to. There are more things that have been produced recently with basic toolkits about how you might approach becoming a PI, which we should put in here. I mentioned the questions area where we're asking some of the, look under the hood stuff, reflective practice, and some of the other issues that you might want to think about. Commissioning, do you need a single model? How does it relate to housing first? How does it relate to things like pre-treatment? So if you click on any of those areas, they'll take you through to a page which then discusses some of those issues in a little bit more depth, and also has links through to various different items where you can read a bit more in the library or in other pages. So there's your questions that's going into a little bit more deeply for those who want to pursue and start thinking about how this applies in your own area. And here we have the voices section. We'll have new faces coming in here every few months or so, and others dropping off and disappearing into the library. And here we've got some service users, some trainers, a development staff, a policy person, and so on and so on and so on. Erin Pitsey here, fantastic woman, developed the first women's refuge in West London in the early 70s. And she's talking about what life was like in the early 70s, doing some cutting edge stuff. Those broadcasts, we've only started doing this since December, effectively, and so we haven't yet got examples of the broadcasts appearing on the screen. But if you wanted to look at one or two of those, let's look at that one with Jay Levy on pre-treatment. Takes a while to load, and Jay Levy is a social worker working with homelessness outreach in Western Massachusetts, and he's written a couple of books which are really brilliant in describing the actual work of engaging people. And so, Ray...
Hi, welcome everyone to today.
The volume we need to address there. But he's starting talking with Jay live in real time. This is a recording of a real-time interview with Jay, and we've got similar recordings of other interviews. We can now start to talk with people across the whole world. And there's a whole little thing about how exactly does it work, what do you need to do, how do you log in, some of the signing in and joining and so on. So there's just a quick how-to guide. Now I mentioned earlier on the library, so here we have published papers, podcasts and so on. Let's, for example, Dick Laban, the newsletter, talks of, so we've just typed in his name here, the little search bar shows that it's looking for a paper by Laban. As it happens, there's only the one at the moment. If there were two or three, that whole thing would be filled up. And here we have Dick Laban's recent paper called Take a Chance on Me. Dick's interested in working with people in the pre-contemplative stage, people who don't necessarily see either the need to change or don't believe they have any capacity to change. So how do you work with and engage with that client group? And his key theme really is that it's not about offering them something that you've been contracted to offer. It's really about developing a relationship and getting some preliminary trust. There'll be more from Dick and an interview with him coming up in a little while. Now I mentioned the members area. We'll go into this in probably a video that is more for members, but just quickly, we have a quick introduction to what it's all about. We have an example of the member map, and here we have the use of keywords. Let's have a look at this, because this is another example of using humour to try and express
doing various things. So this one, and look at the basic attributes of. Now it turns out, in fact, this.
How do you identify people with similar characteristics to yourself? Well, we've done it using Lego.
Jacket, they may well be us.
Yeah. Some of the humour is maybe a little laboured, some of it's maybe a little lame at times, but I couldn't resist trying something with a twinkle in its eye. Here's something on the different interagency partnerships that we're wanting to develop and starting to develop with different, one or two organisations that gave us little funding, for example. or just general bits of business advice on developing the project and so on. And here on the left-hand side, we've got a string of different organisations that are working in the homelessness field one way or another, and particularly in the States. And these are the organisations that we're going to be starting to work with more closely as we get up to a different organisational level, as we start to gear up and step up. Finally, most people have a contact or about us page, and sure enough, if you've got any comments, obviously once you're logged in and registered, then there's a lot more commentary that people can get involved with. So your name, your email address, and any message you would like to send. This is just standard practice. We are working at the moment on a questionnaire for current members, which I can't show you because we haven't got it yet. But this gives you an idea. This is the PieLink. These are the kind of things that we have there. We'll do another one which looks in more detail about what we're trying to do with membership. And maybe one area to look there is future developments that we're getting involved with. Looking at the different features of the site, looking at the nature of the community, looking at the kind of research and evidence that we're trying to develop in a research and evidence conference, for example. The vocabulary, when we were talking about using keywords, is actually quite tricky, trying to find a language that works in both the United States and England. And it gets even more complicated when we have things in French or in German and so on. And so on and so on. The About Us, saying who we are page. So there you have, I think, in a nutshell, your basic introduction to the PieLink as a website. It's a continuous learning and developing program, and it changes. Some bits will stay the same. Maybe once a year we might do a major redesign, and other bits are just continuously new items coming in. Like I said, we have a newsletter, which is going to be, I think, monthly. And they will report on what's been happening. We'll let people know about new items that have come into the library, and we'll also report. We'll also give adverts, I suppose, for things coming up. For example, there are a couple of conferences: the Queen's Nurses Institute and the Faculty of Home Institute, and the Faculty of Homelessness Healthcare have a conference coming up in March. So we're advertising those events, and there'll be more feedback on them in the newsletter and with some of the videos that we have here. So that's it, and that's where we are at the moment. And by all means, have a browse around. If you're interested in becoming a member, then we'll look at what that can entail. The membership side is just about reaching the stage now where it's starting to get lively and active and interactive, but we've got a way to go yet. So that's it. Have a look and see what you find. And let's see if I can turn this off from here.
So do check PieLink.net out, and I think Robin described that really well about how the resources could be really useful. And we're coming to the end of our 5 half-hour films. Thanks for all the feedback that people have given. Do feel free to send me some more feedback as well about things you found helpful or things that you'd like to learn in the future. One of the things that was mentioned is this. I'm giving a link to this other film about, there was some questions about trauma-informed care and PIE and how they link together. So do check out the film with Claire Ritchie, who wrote the PIE guidance for Westminster City Council had commissioned, which is a document well worth getting hold of and having a read of, really helpful. Talk to Joe Prestige from Homeless Link, because that really kind of teases a lot of the points out there. So check out that. That'd be a 6th film. But I'll post the link around with these. And if we just review what we've learned, hopefully, psychologically informed environments, they've got these 5 or 6 elements to them, and at the heart of them is the relationship. So relationships are the key driver for change for people. And often when you hear people's stories, narratives, who come out of having multiple complex needs, complex trauma, they'll talk about relationships with someone who was helpful, was a turning point, and that motivated them to then connect with other people. And people's journeys of recovery are very different, but at the heart of them is usually helpful relationships. But then, as we know, there's a lot of trauma, more than the average amount of trauma in the lives of people who've got multiple complex needs. And it's relationships that also cause the damage. So relationships in themselves have the potential to cause damage and to cause healing and recovery and hope for the future. And so it's worth, that's a key element of the pie. And then we looked at how, if you look at relationships, it's about having a framework of some kind is helpful, because that helps staff to then think about the relationship they have with clients, how clients relate to them and others, but also think about the relationships between the staff team, between management and staff, and between services and other services out there, maybe statutory services such as mental health, addiction, other housing-related services, criminal justice system. And in the film we interviewed Jay Levy, he talked particularly about those different worlds of these services. And so having a framework of some kind is helpful, because it then, when you come to the reflective practice element of PIE, it helps people to consistently kind of think about how the clients might be feeling and thinking and their habits, but also ask exactly the same questions about staff. Look at the emotional impact the work has, because it's very challenging, and to be able to see our own anxieties and frustrations, and when we're getting fed up. And this helps to reduce burnout amongst staff and have better relationships basically with clients, which can help them to get better relationships with other people. So you've got the reflective practice element, you've got the framework of some kind as a feature. You've also got the training and support element, and that's not your traditional training support. It's more, looking at things of a psychological or nature or a therapeutic nature. So things like looking at cycles of change, thinking about pre-treatment, when Jay Levy talked about his 5 principles of pre-treatment. It could be looking at different models, psychological models. It could be looking at trauma-informed care and about how you could try to avoid re-traumatizing people in the whole way your organization works, and be informed about that about a growing awareness of the higher levels of trauma with people with multiple complex needs. And that can help staff to be more mindful in the way they relate to people, but also the policy and procedures and the way the organization goes about things. So there's that potential to look at that. Then there was the thinking about the built environment. And when we interviewed Phil Conn, he was talking about the service he manages, drop-in day service, and how they changed the physical environment, and that had lent itself to being more therapeutic, and that involved service users in that thinking about how the environment can lend itself, or not lend itself when you reflect on it, to being space where you can reflect. And that could be very practical about how many break-off rooms and spaces are there to have confidential one-to-one chats with people, to the decor and the layout, and whether there's the potential for garden areas, all those sort of questions about the physical space. And then we also thought about when we chatted to Sophie Bubis from our service at Fulfilling Lives, we also thought about ways to generate evidence to find out if you do change, and often services are doing 1 or 2 or 3 of these 5 or 6 points of a pie. If you do make changes in those areas, if you're going on that pie journey, then as you kind of think, well, we want to improve and change in this 2 or 3 areas of a pie, how do you then measure and find out and think, well, has that made any difference? Maybe it hasn't, maybe it has, but you need some kind of way to generate evidence. And although you can do evidence-based practice, when you are innovating, doing new things, it's helpful maybe to think about evidence generating, because if you are innovating and trying something new, sometimes you need to try something and then gather some evidence from it. And there's different ways to do that. And Sophie talked about that. And so they're the kind of key elements, really, the idea of looking at those areas of the pie, to acknowledge that sometimes services are doing some of those things, but sometimes services actually aren't having that protective time for reflective practice, to create a space where staff can think about the emotional impact on themselves and each other, relationships. Sometimes it might be there in theory, but the busyness of the job means that it gets cancelled. And so these are all areas where we can all get better at, and then helping clients to reflect through that role modeling, the fact that we protect that time to reflect, learn, grow and develop. So services can develop, staff can learn and grow and develop, and clients can learn and grow and develop through reflective practice, a framework of some kind, some training, some support, having an environment that lends itself to doing that, and also looking at the evidence. Hope you found these things helpful. Do check out, if you haven't done already, the other 5 films and the Homeless Link webinar with Claire Ritchie and Joe Prestige to look at trauma-informed care. And do send some feedback. Let me know whether these have been helpful. And you can also email them around to show them to staff teams or other people who might be interested in PI. And there's a lot more resources than these short films on PieLinknet. So join up to there and have a look and around. And some people prefer videos. Some people prefer to read some documents. Do have a look at Claire's document about the PI guidance. That's well worth and not too long, so that helps when things are not too long, because you can read them and apply them, because often in busy services people want ideas that they can get their heads around fairly quickly, and that's one of the attempts of these films have been to kind of make it demystify PI and to say this is what you could do. Whether you're a commissioner, you could think about commissioning PI. If you're a service manager or staff, you could look at how you could change and to go on that PI journey some more. So I hope you found these helpful. Do let me know and give me a bit of feedback. And thanks for taking the time to watch these films. Thank you.